Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA oddsmaker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Hemminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAOddsBreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by BetDSI. I'm Brian Hemminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts oddsmaker Nick Kalikas to break down this Sunday's UFC Fight Night 130 event, which takes place in Liverpool, England. If you're unfamiliar with our format, Nick and I will break down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Looking back at our last event, we lost one unit for UFC Fight Night 129 on our free bet with a two-team parlay of Zach Cummings and Enrique Barzola. Back to the present, UFC Fight Night 130 features an 11-fight card in total and will be aired on UFC Fight Pass and Fox Sports 1 this Sunday afternoon. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking things off with the lone fight on Fight Pass is a middleweight contest between Elias Theodorou, who is 15-2, and Trevor Smith, who is 15-7. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Theodorou opens minus 350, Trevor Smith at plus 250 as the underdog. Right now, looking over at our sponsored sportsbook, betdsi.eu, is currently Theodorou minus 418. The comeback on Smith is at plus 328. So line margins have tightened up a little bit and more action coming in on the favorite Theodorou. Not really that surprised. I mean, Theodorou is definitely the more popular fighter overall. Trevor Smith has earned my respect. I mean, through the years, he's been one of these guys that's been around the sport for a long time, even before he got a shot in the UFC back in the Strikeforce days. Beyond that, I mean, he's fought in a lot of decent organizations and has put himself out there and got himself to the point where he belongs in the UFC middleweight division. There's no question about that. I mean, he's pulled off some very solid wins throughout his career. And to me, it was one of those things that I didn't trust Trevor Smith throughout his career, honestly, especially early on. He was chinny. His cardio was suspect as well, but he really gained a lot of confidence with me throughout his performances, and he's gotten that cardio in check. His chin is even holding up as of late as well. So he's just, man, put it all out there, and he continues to perform well. I mean, he's coming off of a solid, impressive decision win over Chris Camozzi in his last fight, and now he's facing a young gun, I guess, if you will, in Theodorou, that this is going to be a tough test for him as well. So UFC continues to not give him the easiest matchups, and Smith continues to do some good things. Here, though, I think it is going to be difficult for him because I think Theodorou's takedown defense is probably good enough where he's going to be able to keep this fight upright. And if he does, I think his unorthodox but effective striking style for Theodorou will have success against Smith. Smith's striking ability has improved. It's been probably a bit underrated, honestly, but at the same time, his strike defense and his chin is still definitely suspect. Even though I've complimented him, it's been holding up a little bit better. I still think along the way, even though Theodorou doesn't have a tremendous amount of knockout power, his unorthodox striking might just land something along the way, and we could see that chin finally, not come through again for Smith. So I think that's a very good possibility. I also think that the effectiveness of the striking game and the ability to keep the fight upright for Theodorou is going to get him the win anyway. He should be able to outpoint Smith in what should be a pretty interesting decision if it hits the scorecards, but still should be clear enough that Theodorou wins. So I don't have much confidence in this matchup for Smith, although, again, I do have a tremendous amount of respect for him. And Theodorou, we should say as well, he is improving. He's, found his groove in the UFC now as well. I think he's, been spotty at times. I mean, he's had some performances. I'm sure that he wants to get back that Thiago Santos performance a few fights back, even that Tavares performance. Even though Tavares, that loss isn't too bad now, Theodorou still needs to step on the gas at times and be a little bit more aggressive and not just kind of let his opponents dictate the pace to him. So here I think it's a matchup where he's going to be confident enough that he lets him fly, and I think he'll have success by doing so. So my pick is Theodorou. He is a solid favorite for a reason. I think he probably does come through.
Yeah, these fighters are similar, except Theodorou has better durability. He's more active. He's more athletic. He's younger. I mean, he's basically got all the intangibles going for him. He probably is also the better wrestler. I mean, maybe Smith has a little bit of a better ground game in terms of submissions, but I do not see Smith pulling off anything crazy on the ground either against Theodorou. And Smith can be active on the feet, but I don't really think he has enough power to really bother Theodorou. I think Theodorou can land some kicks against Smith. I think that he can out-punch and at least outwork Smith, even though Theodorou isn't that great of a striker either. I just think he just out-everything's Smith here. The only way Smith can win is if he can drag Theodorou to the ground and grind this out. And I just don't think Theodorou will let him do that because of his speed and quickness and athleticism. So I just think it's a terrible matchup for Smith, and I favor Theodorou significantly, and he should at least win by a one-sided decision. Now, kicking things off on the Fox Sports 1 prelims, we have Jillian Robertson, who is 4-2, taking on Molly McCann, who is 7-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
McCann opened minus 265. The comeback on Robertson at plus 185. Right now, looking over at BetDSI, it is currently minus 160 for McCann. The comeback on Robertson at plus 130. And it was just actually higher, but as we're recording the podcast, some sharp action comes in on Robertson. It hits the dog and the line just kind of plummets from there. So what you're seeing in the price drop is actually some sharp action coming in the dog's way, like I just mentioned. And it could be justifiable as well, because stylistically, this is a striker versus grappler matchup. McCann is a striking-based fighter, has a wrestling background as well. The Cage Warriors champion, so that says a lot right there. I mean, if you win the Cage Warriors strap outside of the UFC, that's very respectable. I mean, look, just a quick name to throw out there. I mean, they have produced many champions, name-worthy champions, but Conor McGregor was a dual champion in Cage Warriors. So that's just to throw it out there. So McCann is definitely an up-and-coming prospect in many people's eyes that is legit. I mean, she definitely has a lot of power on the feet, especially, again, I mentioned before, we don't see a lot of knockouts in the women's divisions oftentimes, but McCann is one of those exceptions to the rule where she has enough power in both of her fists that she can get the job done a lot of times. And she has that wrestling background that in most cases she's able to fend off some takedowns, keep the fight upright, and then utilize her striking or get top position and drop some bombs as well. But looking a little bit closer, I think she's going to have a struggle in this fight against Robertson. Robertson is one of the girls that came from the Ultimate Fighter that ended up getting beat up. Actually, Honchek is the one that got her beaten off the show or whatnot. That's who she lost to on the show, I should say. That's a respectable loss for Robertson. Obviously, Honchek's a very solid fighter. We know that. But beyond that, I mean, she just hasn't gotten the respect. She hasn't gotten the recognition at all. I mean, Robertson is kind of floating under the radar. Nobody thinks much of her. And then she comes out and she pulls off a heck of an armbar victory in her UFC debut after the tough show against Whitmire. So that was a really solid win, especially how smooth her armbar transition was. But before that, if you watch, I mean, Robertson's single leg takedown was pretty solid as well. And if you look back through her career, her wrestling's a bit underrated. So Robertson has some wrestling to go along with really solid jiu-jitsu, and she's proven even if you put her on her back, she can submit you there as well. So there's no mistake here. This is, again, a classic battle of your striker versus grappling matchup. And I think McCann's going to look to keep this fight upright. Robertson's going to look to keep this fight or take this fight to the floor and utilize her big ground advantage. So I think there is a significant difference here. If McCann is able to keep it upright, she's going to be landing the power shots. Robertson could be in some serious trouble. If Robertson could get it to the ground, I think McCann's going to be in some serious trouble. So I do understand why the action came in on Robertson as a dog. The line was priced a bit too high, but now it's dropped for a good reason, like I said. I'm kind of going back and forth with this fight. I could realistically see it going either way. I'm actually surprised that McCann got matched with a difficult matchup, stylistically at least, because she is making her UFC debut in her home country. And I figured that UFC might throw her a bone for her debut. But again, styles make fights. This is a difficult matchup. I guess I'm going to have to agree with the sharp action here and go with Robertson, because I think she does end up getting that single leg or getting the fight to the floor. And on the floor, she is going to have the advantage. So I think that's how it plays off. Robertson probably gets a win on the ground, either with ground and pound stoppage or probably more so she ends up finding a submission along the way. So good fight. Should be an interesting fight, to say the least, but I'm going to pick Robertson to get the W as an underdog here.
And I can definitely see Robertson pulling off a submission in this fight, but Molly McCann is a fighter entering the UFC here on a nice wave of hype. I mean, she is exciting. She goes out there and she beats people up on the feet. She has good power, heavy hands. She's active. She's the type of fighter that really could spice up the women's 125-pound division. She's got a great nickname, Meatball. And Jillian Robertson, I really wasn't that impressed by what I saw out of her. I mean, yeah, she looked good in her fight on the Tough finale, but on the show, she really wasn't that impressive. She really hasn't been that impressive in the rest of her MMA career. I mean, you look and, getting smoked by Hannah Goldie in her debut, and then obviously Cynthia Calvillo isn't a bad loss, but I mean that was somebody that's fighting at 115. So I think Molly McCann, I mean, if this fight does not go to the ground, McCann is just going to batter Robertson. And you know the saying, I mean, you punch a black belt enough times, they drop to a purple belt. You punch them a couple more times, they drop to, a white belt. So I can see McCann really hurting Robertson on the feet, and Robertson shooting some desperation takedowns instead of like setting them up. So, cause you gotta remember, Robertson wasn't exactly fighting a world beater on the tough finale in Whitmire. So I think, this is a much tougher test for Robertson, and I don't think that she'll have an easy path to get this to the floor, because to get it to the ground, she's gonna have to set up a good takedown. If she's shooting from way outside, McCann should be able to stuff those easy, or even just sidestep them. So, I think UFC knows what they're doing with this matchup, although if it does go to the ground, Robertson definitely has an edge, a big edge, but I think McCann keeps it upright, and I think the favorite here picks up an impressive victory, probably by TKO at some point. So my pick is going to be McCann. Now moving up to the welterweight division, we have Bradley Scott, who is 12-5, taking on Carlo Pietrasoli, who is 10-1. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Pietrasoli minus 210, Brad Scott plus 160. Right now looking over at BetDSI, it's minus 159 for Pietrasoli, the comeback on Scott at plus 129. So another spot where dog action did come in early on Scott, and the line has dropped a little bit. Getting into this fight, obviously Pietrasoli is actually another Cage Warriors vet. He performed really well in his last fight. A lot of you guys know, Dalby from the UFC, a former UFC veteran, and Pietrasoli is actually coming off of an impressive win, a close decision, hard-fought battle over Nicholas Dalby. And that's how he kind of got the call up here. And it wasn't too long ago, actually, as well. It was just a couple months back. So, or I should say just about a month back, not even a couple months back. But, so an impressive, grueling 3-round war that he had with Dalby. It was kind of back and forth a little bit. They both hurt each other. Pietrasoli was pretty impressive in that fight, but I was expecting a little bit more, and going back through some of his footage, he's okay. I think what he is about that level of Dalby, which is not necessarily bad, because I think Nicholas Dalby could still be in the UFC or on roster, and he's a solid fighter. Very well-rounded, and I think Pietrasoli is exactly that as well. He's got decent stand-up, he's got a decent wrestling game, he's got decent grappling ability. Everything across the board is very solid with Pietrasoli. The only problem is he's one of these guys that I think doesn't really excel or doesn't dominate you in any area. So it's not like he's going to stand and bang with you and just get you in all sorts of trouble. It's not going to be like his wrestling so dominant that he's going to continue to get takedowns and just dominate you on the ground. He's just solid in every area. So I think the matchup with Scott is going to be difficult for him, because I think Scott's a pretty solid fighter as well. He's a frustrating fighter, because I picked Scott time and time again to pull off some W's, and he's let me down time and time again. I mean, Brad Scott has a very underrated game in probably all aspects except IQ. That's what drives me crazy about Brad Scott sometimes. It's his IQ. I mean, he'll be looking okay in a fight, or he'll, make one mistake and get himself beat. And then on the feet, it'll go back and forth. Scott has some underrated boxing. He's got a little bit of power. I'm expecting this to be kind of a coin flip on the feet a little bit. Pietrasoli's probably a little bit more versed in his striking ability, but I think Scott might have a little bit more effective power. Brad Scott is dropping back down to welterweight after he had kind of a shaky, run at middleweight, because he did end up losing a couple fights in the UFC. Of course, he did win a couple fights as well. So again, a shaky kind of run there which I was expecting him to do a little bit better, because again, he is a very talented fighter. But now dropping back down to welterweight, he should have some size, and he should have some power to go along with it if he does the weight cut right. So interesting to see. This is, for me, it's hard to depend on either guy, because again, Pietrasoli is making his official UFC debut. I'm sure there's going to be some nerves. He just fought a month ago. Scott has let me down with his IQ many times before as well. So that's why it's such a tough pick'em type of fight for me. Now, as far as the betting window goes, I wouldn't lay the chalk here. So it is a dog or pass situation. So I understand some of the people that came in early on, taking that dog money with Scott. But just be careful. I mean, like I said, Scott is one of those guys that can make a bonehead move and get you beat right away. So with that said, I'm still going to pick him here, I guess, because I do think stylistically it is a good matchup for him. And he doesn't have those UFC jitters stepping in here. And I think he needs to get back on track and get rolling again and kind of prove to UFC that he belongs on this roster, and he does have potential. So not that Peter Sully does not, but I think that his debut fight against Scott is going to be a tough one, and I see Scott kind of edging this fight out. So should be a war. If it hits the scorecards, I wouldn't be surprised if it's a split decision type of fight, but I guess I'm going to go out on a limb a little bit and pick the underdog Scott here.
And I agree. I think this is a decent matchup for Brad Scott. The one concern, obviously, as Nick mentioned, is Scott returning to welterweight. How is he going to handle that? This is the first time he's fought at welterweight since he battled Robert Whittaker on the Tough Smashes finale in December of 2012. So it's been 5.5 years since Brad Scott's fought at welterweight. And he spent 5.5 years as an undersized middleweight with mixed results. He went 3-3. All 3 losses to decent fighters, Shotgo, Jack Hermanson most recently, and all 3 wins to decent fighters, but none of them are even in the UFC anymore. So what are you going to really take from that? Now, I think Brad Scott dropping down to welterweight is probably a good idea, because at welterweight, he's actually going to be the size of his opponents. He was always a bit stocky for the middleweight division. And against Peter Sully, Scott is going to be a little bit taller. He's going to have a little bit of reach. So I think that he might, as long as he can keep some of that strength that he had in the middleweight division, he might be able to bully Peter Sully around. I mean, Peter Sully has kind of a wild, kooky karate style on the feet. He's aggressive. So if Scott does not get overwhelmed by that, I think that he'll be in decent shape. You got to remember, Peter Sully fought a month ago in a grueling split decision over Nicholas Dalby, a former UFC fighter. So it's not like he had like a quick first round knockout and he's just ready to go again. I mean, this was a battle. So this is not an easy, quick turnaround for Peter Sully. I mean, yeah, he might still be in shape, but I mean, he took some damage in that fight. It was not a one-sided stomping. So I think if anything, it probably favors Brad Scott that Peter Sully's stepping in on the short notice for sure. And I think Scott does have a little bit of power that hopefully will translate to dropping back down to welterweight. And Scott, as long as he doesn't make any silly mistakes, I think Scott should have a little bit of the edge on the ground as well. Just in terms of with wrestling, with top position, maybe even pulling off a submission. I mean, he did pull off a guillotine choke against Dylan Andrews and against Michael Kuiper. So he does have some of that sneaky submission ability too. So as Nick mentioned, Brad Scott is a talented fighter that has underperformed, but I think maybe by dropping back down to the welterweight division, he'll be able to reach some of that potential again. And I think that this is a fight that he can win. So I'm going to side with Brad Scott as well. Now dropping down to the women's bantamweight division, we have Lena Landsberg, who is 7-3, taking on Gina Mazzani, who is 5-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Landsberg opened -185, Mazzani at +145. Right now, looking over at BetDSI, it is currently -135 for Mazzani, and Landsberg is at +105. So the line flipped. Early action coming on Mazzani, and the action continues to kind of trend that way a little bit. So not much love and respect for Landsberg at this point. And she's a pretty good fighter. Obviously, she's more known for stepping in on short notice and taking the fight with Cyborg and actually hanging in there a lot better than most of us thought she would in that spot. I mean, she took a beating and a punishment in that fight. So she actually, in a loss, she actually gained a lot of respect because she survived till halfway through the second round or whatnot and just took a beating from Cyborg. And then she follows it up over a very solid win over Pudilova, which Pudilova has actually performed relatively well in the UFC. So Landsberg is not a bad fighter. I mean, she's got good striking. She's got good experience. She's pretty strong in the clinch as well. I think she has a bit of a takedown game. Not much. I mean, she's not really a big time key ground player at all. She'd rather, again, hold you up in the clinch and work her clinch a little bit and then strike with you and try to land some bombs on the feet. That's more so Landsberg game. Now, Mazzani, on the other hand, is a little bit more, I think, well-rounded, a little bit more in your face, a little bit more, I don't want to say violent in more areas, but I'll tell you what, she's been pretty impressive. I think a lot of people kind of threw any thought of her being solid out the window when she got dominated by by Sarah McMahon, and she lost a quick fight by submission to McMahon, and then she followed up though in her last fight, which a lot of people were kind of counter out, and she got a pretty impressive win. She could have stopped that fight several times throughout. I mean, Mazzani, she was going 150 miles an hour in that fight. I mean, she was being aggressive. Her stand-up, you could see the improvement she's made through the years, especially from the Ultimate Fighter show as well. And then her wrestling ability to get the fight to the ground, to drop some ground and pound as well. She does have submission ability. She's just an aggressive fighter. So I think what's going to take place here, she finally has a little bit of confidence. She finally, I think, has a stylistic match that's going to be good for her, especially as the fight progresses. Because one thing I've noticed from Landsberg, she's capable of obviously going 3 strong, but she does fade enough that she could let her opponent get back into the fight as the fight goes on, even if she starts off winning and doing relatively well in the first round. For Landsberg, I mean, we saw that kind of take place a little bit in her last fight against Ladd as well. She looked good early on in that fight, and then Ladd made some adjustments and then just dominated her. I think Mazzani is going to be even tougher for her because Mazzani isn't going to be as tentative as Ladd was at first. Mazzani's going to be in her face. She's going to have a little bit more success early on. But even if she loses the first round, I think Mazzani's good enough to come back and win round 2 and round 3 and possibly even finish Landsberg along the way. So I have to agree with the early action again that's trending Mazzani's way because I think she is the better fighter in this spot. I think she's just been a little bit underrated, but I do think that the way she pressures and the way she's just been kind of relentless in her confidence level right now is going to be a little bit too much for Landsberg. So she's either going to win by a pretty competitive, but I think clear enough decision that she wins 2 out of 3 rounds on the scorecards, or again, she finishes Landsberg on the way, to a decision. So I think Mazzani is the side here, and I'm going to pick her to win the fight. Probably, I think by late stoppage is what I'm picking here. But if not, again, she wins on the scorecards.
And I agree. I think Gina Mazzani is the more talented fighter here. Mazzani showcased some decent takedowns in her last fight, and I think that could definitely be to her advantage to use them here against Landsberg, who does not have a very good ground game, is not very good defensively on the canvas, and could definitely be exposed if she's put on her back. On the feet, I think Mazzani will be decent. I expect her to do better at range. If it goes to the clinch, that's probably where Landsberg wants it. Landsberg is pretty strong, and she's known as the elbow queen. She can do some dirty boxing. She can lean on Mazzani. She can grind this out a little bit along the fence. She can just turn this fight into a bit more of an ugly mess. And that's probably the best path to victory for Landsberg because, being the older fighter, with less conditioning, I don't think she has the ability to win a longer style fight. We've seen Landsberg against Pudilova even, she got outstruck. She got her eye messed up in that fight and, she was able to win that one, but I think, you could argue that she lost that one too. So I think, Mazzani has the skill to win this fight but Landsberg could start strong. I mean, she won the first round against Aspen Ladd in her last fight before Ladd turned the tides, got her taken down, then got top position and just beat her into a pulp until she got a TKO on the canvas. I can see Mazzani doing the same thing. I don't think Mazzani has quite the ground game that Aspen Ladd has or the ground and pound, but I can see Mazzani getting takedowns and grinding this out as well. I can see Mazzani doing some damage on the feet just with her aggression. Just as long as Mazzani avoids the elbows and avoids the clinch, I think that she's in decent shape. So I'm going to pick Mazzani as well. Now moving up to the middleweight division for the final bout of the preliminary card, we have Daniel Kelly, who is 13-3, taking on Tom Breese, who is 10-1. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Breeze open minus 260 to come back on Kelly plus 180. Right now, looking over at BetDSI, it is currently Breeze minus 350 to come back on Kelly plus 270. So more action coming in Breeze's way. Tough line to set, honestly, with Breeze being out for as long as he has. I mean, he's moving up to middleweight after 2 years of a layoff because of injuries or whatnot as well. So we all know the kind of talent Breeze has. I mean, there's been all sorts of hype around him before he made his UFC debut, and that again was at welterweight. He's had a pretty decent run overall in his career so far. I mean, a little bit, I think, disappointing because the expectations were just set so high. And I'm saying that because he lost a close split decision to Sean Strickland in a fight. But again, we were all expecting Breeze to possibly be an automatic type of title contender, that kind of special ability that he has because he's got such a well-rounded skill set, still young at age 26 as well. I mean, good striking, good wrestling ability. Obviously, he's got a great jiu-jitsu game to go along with it. So he's just a tough out for a lot of people welterweight. Now, again, with the time off, he was a big welterweight. Now he's going to, I think, still be a pretty sizable middleweight in this spot as well. But he has his hands full. I mean, he's facing a true middleweight here in Kelly, which has recently, I mean, you got to take your hat off to him. The run that Kelly's been on, I never seen it coming. I mean, he's put in the work. You got to, again, respect what he's done and what he's been able to accomplish. I know he's coming off back-to-back losses, but before that, I mean, his wins over Shot Evans, his win over Kamosi, his win over Carlos Jr. I mean, just those alone, who would have ever thought, from the Ultimate Fighter show that he would have that kind of success in the middleweight division in the UFC. Now, again, after that, he has lost to Brunson, and he followed up by losing a decision to Theodoro. But still, I mean, the work that Kelly's put in has showed he wants to win. He wants to be a player, and he's made himself one. So this is another spot where he's going to come to fight. He's going to be difficult to take down. He's a strong fighter. He's got some underrated power. He's in your face. So Breeze has to be prepared here. But I think the Kelly style matches up relatively well with Breeze, where I think Breeze is going to be able to land some shots on the feet, probably test that chin of Kelly, and then it might not pass because I do think that Breeze is the more durable fighter of the two. Even though Kelly, again, he's a warrior. He's been in there. He comes to win. I still think at age 40, I mean, he's facing a guy almost half his age in Breeze. And, again, I think Kelly's better days, even though he's almost in his prime as far as career goes, as far as fighting style, as far as IQ, he's never been better, but he's been in decent shape too, but he's still 40 years old, and that chin is not going to get any younger, as we've said time and time again on this podcast before. So hard to trust 40-year-olds that have been knocked out, especially against these young guns that are up and comers. So I do think it's going to be a tough fight for Breeze. But I do think that he's able to finish this fight along the way as well. If not, he probably outpoints Kelly to decision. So solid favorite for a reason. I agree with it. I think Breeze is just going to be a little bit too much for Kelly here. So my pick is Breeze to win.
And I agree. I mean, Daniel Kelly is slower, older, doesn't have as much power, doesn't have the reach of Tom Breeze. Really, the only thing Kelly has going for him in this fight is that he has a lot of heart and he's been more active. I mean, Tom Breeze we haven't seen in quite a while, actually, since his close loss to Sean Strickland. And that was 2 years ago. So he's been dealing with some injuries, and now when he comes back, he's moving up a weight class, which I think is actually a good move for him. Breeze was a monstrous welterweight. I mean, he was just too big. And he'll fit right in the middleweight division. He's actually got the height and reach on Kelly, even though he's moving up a weight class. So Breeze has a good jab. He has a spectacular ground game. He has some pop in his hands. His big issue, though, is he can be outworked. So if Daniel Kelly really pushes the pace on him and gets aggressive, I think Breeze could get flustered, especially if he's rusty. So that's my big concern, is rust and getting outworked and getting frustrated, because that's kind of how Breeze lost to Strickland. I mean, I think Breeze is definitely the better fighter than Strickland, but he got exposed a little bit there. I don't think Daniel Kelly is capable of exploiting those holes nearly as well, but I think Kelly has a shot, but it's not a good one. So I like Tom Breeze here. I think he's a talented fighter. He may have been a bit overrated at the time when he got his last loss, but I think he learned some lessons, and I think that he'll bounce back here. And I think that there's a good chance that he doesn't just beat Daniel Kelly, but he might finish him. So my pick is going to be Tom Breeze. Now, kicking off the Fox Sports 1 main card, we have another middleweight contest between Eric Spicely, who is 10-4, and Darren Stewart, who is 7-3 with one no contest. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Spicely opens minus 260, Stewart plus 180. Right now, looking over at BetDSI, It is currently Spicely at minus 170. The comeback on Stewart at plus 140. So another spot where the line opened a tad bit high for the favorite and dog action coming in on Stewart. I don't blame him. I mean, especially at that plus 180 type of number that you're getting on Stewart early on. Now, I really don't think you could have a lot of faith in either guy at this point, honestly. I know that more so probably in Spicely because he's faced better competition throughout his career, and that ground game that Spicely has is tough to deal with, to say the least. I mean, the guy is definitely a very capable grappler, an opportunistic grappler, and he puts himself in really good positions. It doesn't take much for this guy once he has you on the ground to finish you off. So Spicely is very dangerous on the ground. Stewart is a pretty strong, obviously well-built, aggressive fighter that is kind of a powerhouse, but at the same time, his IQ has been somewhat suspect, and he came in with a ton of hype. Coming into the UFC, a lot of people thought that he would be a heavy hitter with, some good takedown defense and the ability to get the fight to the ground offensively as well. He's got some decent wrestling. They were expecting a little bit more from him, but unfortunately, he's just underperformed. I mean, and this matchup for him here, I think he needs to keep the fight upright and probably land some bombs on Spicely. And that's the way to win here against Spicely, because I think Spicely, if anything, his weakness is in the stand-up game. He's a bit unorthodox and he has a little bit of power, so you never know. But I think here in this spot, I still, even though the striking will be close because both of these guys lack in several areas on the feet, I still give the slight edge to Stewart here. And then on the ground, again, Stewart can get top position here. Spicely might actually want that to happen here, and Spicely can obviously, work his ground game from there. But I don't know if that's a smart move for Stewart either. So this is another tough fight for me because I just don't trust either guy all that much. I'm going to lean a little bit more with Spicely because, I mean, if there's something that's pretty clear is Stewart's ground game, even though from top position he's not bad and he could do some damage, I think that he has shown a weakness on the ground as far as the sub defense goes, and you don't want to play that game with Spicely, as I mentioned. So I'm going to say that Spicely is able to get the fight to the floor, and with his opportunistic ability, he's able to probably sink in a choke or something of that nature and get the sub here over Stewart. So I think it's Spicely by submission, but I'm not confident. Again, I mean, both these guys are so flawed in a lot of other areas defensively that it's hard for me to trust either guy. So from a betting perspective, I would stay far, far away from this fight and just see how it plays out, because it should be a finish one way or the other, I think. So my pick is Spicely, but not a confident one.
Yeah, I have to agree. Eric Spicely is the better fighter here than Darren Stewart. I mean, if you actually watch Darren Stewart perform, he is, he's been getting his wins recently by getting takedowns. And you do that against Eric Spicely, I mean, he's going to wrap you up. So I think Darren Stewart's in trouble. Stewart has a bit of pop in his hands, but I mean, he's not that talented of a striker. His striking defense is terrible. So this is a pretty bad matchup. I expect Eric Spicely to hold his own with Stewart on the feet, and then on the ground, if and when it does go to the ground, Spicely should be dominating Darren Stewart on the ground. I mean, realistically, the only way I see Stewart winning is if he cracks Spicely standing bad and hurts him and gets a finish. Because if it goes to the floor, I think Spicely submits him. And I think even in just a regular back and forth stand-up contest, I think Spicely can hold his own there, but I don't think it would stay there because Spicely will be pursuing the takedown at some point. And if Stewart shoots in for a takedown, I think Spicely wraps him up like an octopus and puts him away. So, I definitely think, this is Eric Spicely's fight to lose, so I'm gonna pick him. I'm a little bit more confident about it than Nick. Now dropping down to the welterweight division, we have Claudio Silva, who is 11-1, taking on Nordine Taleb, who is 14-4. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Taleb opened minus 190. The comeback on Silva at plus 150. Right now, looking over at BetDSI, it's minus 350 for Taleb. The comeback on Silva at plus 270. So line was a little bit too short there for Taleb, and the betting public in general came in and bet it up. And I do think that it's probably right, although the Silva is definitely a head scratcher to me in a lot of ways, because I think that his ability and his ground game is something special, especially for the welterweight division. And if he's able to get the takedowns and obviously work his ground game, work his ground and pound, and work his submission game, he could be a threat for a lot of people. he shouldn't be able to do that here. That's why the early action came in on Talib, because Talib has good enough takedown defense, good enough wrestling, and better striking that he should be stylistically a terrible matchup for Silva in this spot, you would think. And I do feel that it should play out that way as well. The interesting thing here, though, is Silva's been out for 4 years, and that was due to, I guess, lingering issues, they say. So, and it's kept him out for that long. So he's had time to kind of, throughout the injuries and healing up and all that, get his game better in between. And, if he's been healthy enough to train at a decent pace along the way or whatnot, and make some improvements. So we might see a better version of Silva in this spot. I mean, he does have some solid victories. If for those of you guys that don't know much about Silva, I'll just name off a couple. I mean, we were talking about Brad Scott earlier today, and I was talking about some of his IQ or whatnot along the way, and one of those fights was actually here that I was talking about, because Silva beat Brad Scott by decision, and he was able to get some takedowns against Scott and, edged out a close decision win. I mean, Silva deserved to get the nod. It was a tough opponent for him, but he got the job done over Scott. And then to follow it up, he repeated that against Leon Edwards. And we all know how good he is in the welterweight division. Now, granted, that was early on in Leon Edwards' UFC career, and he's gotten much better, and he's improved his takedown defense since. But still, even at that time, Edwards was not an easy guy to put to the floor, and Silva was able to do that time and time again. And that's how he beat Edwards as well. So he's got quality wins. He's capable of pulling off wins. Now, again, against Talib here, though, I don't know. I don't see it. I don't think he's going to have success getting Talib down. And if he doesn't, Talib by far is the better striker on the feet. So Talib is just going to have to fight smart here, and he should be able to get the job done. Silva on the feet, from what we've seen, again, he could have improved with 4 years being out, but from what we've seen in the past, he's a dangerous striker on the feet because he throws with a lot of power, but he is a little bit sloppy, and he does tend to wear down. I mean, especially if he stays up in strikes. If the fight doesn't take place on the ground with him, it seems like he gasses faster if it's up on the feet and he doesn't get to kind of play his style. So I think he could be some serious trouble on the feet, although he is dangerous. Talib should be able to kind of keep this fight upright and kind of pick him apart and get the decision nod. But this is a head scratcher, and for the reason I just said, because Silva does have potential and he's got some quality wins on his resume again. And the stylistic matchup here, I'm surprised almost the UFC matched him with a hard stylistic matchup like Talib. So we could see Silva being kind of under the radar here and pulling off his best win yet, even though he's got some quality wins, like I said. So I don't expect that to be the case, though. I still have to stick with my head, and my brain tells me that Talib should be a bad matchup for Silva. So I'm going to pick Talib to get the W here. But it would be interesting if we see Silva get some takedowns here and surprisingly have his way with Talib on the ground. I think that would make for, a new threat in welterweight, and people would take Silva a lot more serious if that was the case here. So I'm going to pick Talib to win, but I wouldn't necessarily mind seeing a big, solid favorite like this go down, bust up some parlays, and then see, like I said, a new kind of contender possibly emerge at welterweight, or at least be on his way to becoming one with Silva. Because if he gets the job done over Talib, then you definitely have to respect the guy. So my pick is going to be Talib to get the job done here, probably on the scorecards, maybe inside along the way because he stops him on the feet. But hopefully it's a good fight.
I don't really think this is going to be a good fight. I think it's going to be pretty one-sided. I mean, Claudio Silva hasn't fought in forever, 3.5 years. So, I mean, it was 2014 when he last competed inside the octagon. The guy he beat, Leon Edwards, is a quality win, but that was early in Edwards' UFC run. He's added a lot of wrestling to his game since then, since he got out-grappled in that fight, and he's a completely different fighter. And Claudio Silva is still just that same one-dimensional grappler that doesn't really have any stand-up at all. I expect Nordine Talib is going to dominate him on the feet. And as long as Talib can stuff a takedown or two and just keep his distance and force Silva to shoot from the outside, he should be able to keep upright over the course of 3 rounds at least to win a decision. But I think what really happens here is Silva shoots in for a bunch of takedowns. They don't work. He gets frustrated. He starts trading, and then Talib's probably going to knock him out. Talib has shown a little bit of extra pop in his hands over recent fights. He's looked really good. I mean, he's on a nice run. I mean, he got that knockout of Danny Roberts. He knocked out Eric Silva. He beat Oliver Enkamp. I mean, he's a very talented fighter. I mean, even his loss to Santiago Ponzinibbio, I mean, that was a decision, and it wasn't that one-sided. I mean, he's a guy that is a legit player in the 170-pound division. I was expecting Talib to be taking on a top 15 welterweight. after that last win. But he's facing Claudio Silva instead, and I think this is almost a gift. Taleb shouldn't just win, he should dominate this fight. So my pick is definitely going to be Nordine Taleb. Now dropping down to the featherweight division, we have Jason Knight, who is 20-4, taking on Makwan Amirkhani, who is 13-3. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Knight opens minus 230, Amirkhani at plus 170. Right now, looking over at BetDSI, it's actually Knight minus 165. The comeback on Amirkhani plus 135. So line margins have tightened up quite a bit and more action coming in Amirkhani's way. Line did open a bit high with Knight, and it's since gotten straightened out. I think it's definitely at a better spot where it is now. I mean, Amirkhani, you got to take the guy serious. I mean, he's actually performed relatively well. When I looked at footage before his UFC debut and looked back through some of Amirkhani's past performances, I wasn't all that impressed with him. I know he had some hype. Again, he was kind of a prospect a lot of people were talking about and some buzz, but I watched his performances and I thought, man, this guy's got a long way to go as far as improvements made. I mean, in a stand-up game overall, I mean, we know that the ground is his specialty, and he's showed us since his UFC debut that he's legit as far as the ground game goes. He's got some good wrestling, some very good submissions to go along with it, some good ground control overall as well, and he's faced some decent competition. I mean, again, I think it was kind of flukish, the win over Ogle in his UFC debut, but since that time, he's performed relatively well against solid competition. Even in his last fight, he's coming off of a loss against Arnold Allen. Arnold Allen is a very good fighter, very solid fighter, especially for the featherweight weight class. And I think Amirkhani, I mean, it was a back and forth fight. It could have realistically went either way. I think it was the right decision. Allen deserved to win that fight, but Amirkhani hung in there, was in some bad spots. He had to kind of, push through some fatigue, which in my opinion was one of, the things he had to improve in his game as well. Amirkhani's cardio has always been a little bit suspect, but he is getting better in that area. Now, I should mention this off the rip as well. Amirkhani's been out for over a year as well. So I think in that time, I'm sure he could have made some improvements in both the striking aspect of his game, which is needed, his cardio, his conditioning as well. Of course, again, I think his best attribute is on the ground, so he can continue to improve there as well. But he's a tough out for a lot of people. Knight, though, is a slick fighter. We all know that as well. He's such a well-rounded fighter. He's a warrior. I mean, Knight's the type of fighter that's in your face. I mean, he's aggressive. He's effective with the striking ability on the feet. He's got a decent wrestling in his own right, decent takedown defense overall in general, but he has been put on his back and he has been beat that way as well. Now, once you get Knight on his back, we all know this as well. Man, he throws subs. I mean, he doesn't stop coming at you with sub attempt after sub attempt, reversal attempt. I mean, he's scrambling ability. Knight is hard to deal with. It's not like you could just take him down and lay in his guard and, drop some ground and pound without him trying to scramble and make your life miserable. So this fight is going to be interesting because on the feet, I think Knight is a little bit better, even though Amirkhani has just as much power, pure power. And we've seen Knight recently struggle in his last couple fights as well. So mentally, confidence wise, where's Knight at really? We're not sure. Amirkhani, he doesn't lack confidence. That's for sure. I mean, he's a very confident fighter. I mean, we've seen that from the beginning of his UFC career. In fact, he's a little bit overwhelming with his talk. But that being said, he's backed it up for the most part here. So I think this should be an interesting fight. Can Amirkhani get Knight to the ground and avoid his submission game and just kind of keep him in check on the ground? It's possible. On the feet, can Amirkhani maybe drop a big punch and hurt Knight and do some damage and maybe finish him that way? It's possible as well. Can Knight outpoint Amirkhani and, keep the fight upright or give him some fits enough to win or possibly finish Amirkhani? I could see it going that way. This is a good fight. It should be a fun scrap, and it's a good test for Amirkhani after he came through that performance against Allen to back it up with another solid fighter that should give him fits as well. If he comes away with a close split decision loss tonight or even a win obviously here, I think his stock continues to rise and he's making those improvements that he needs. So I guess for me, I'm kind of going back and forth on this fight, and I should mention, as I do in all podcasts as well, our final picks will be displayed on MMAOddsBreaker.com for our staff picks. So make sure on fight day you check out the website and you go to our staff picks. That's where all of our final picks will be posted, because some of these fights, of course, through the week we're on the fence about, and as we get closer to fight time and after weigh-ins or whatnot, we make our final decisions. So that's why I'm saying this. But for right now, I'm going to lean with the underdog here, Amirkhani. I think that I've liked his improvements. I like what I've seen in him. I think that Knight might be in a bad spot right now as far as confidence goes, and I think Amirkhani with the time off could show us a little bit of improvement to go along with it too. So I think all signs right now are indicating Amirkhani comes away with a win here, so I'm going to lean his way. But again, check MMAOddsBreaker.com for our staff picks on fight day.
Yeah, this is a tricky matchup. Makwan Amirkhani is a very talented fighter, and it's not like he's had a bad run in the UFC. I mean, he had some quality victories, and then his one loss was a close split decision to Arnold Allen, who's actually also fighting on this card. And Jason Knight he went on a nice run, and then he looked terrible in his last couple fights. But styles make fights, and I think that this might be a better stylistic matchup for Jason Knight. I mean, you look at how Makwan Amirkhani wins his fights. It's with the powerful wrestling, takedowns, looking for submissions, looking for ground and pound. And if he does that against Jason Knight, I think Jason Knight has such an active and aggressive ground game that he's really going to thwart Amirkhani on the canvas. I can see Knight throwing up a ton of submissions towards Amirkhani from his back. I can see him working for sweeps, all kinds of different transitions on the canvas, really flustering Amirkhani if and when it does go to the floor. And on the feet, while Jason Knight can be definitely exposed to talented strikers that can counter the offensive onslaught that he likes to throw, Amirkhani isn't that great of a stand-up fighter. I mean, what he really wants to do is look for openings and then use that athletic wrestling background to drive you into the canvas and look for the victory from top position. So if this fight stays standing, even though Knight isn't that great of a striker, he is an active striker and he has a little bit of pop in his hands. I can see Knight outworking Amirkhani in the stand-up. And if it goes to the floor, yeah, Amirkhani is the better wrestler, but that doesn't mean that he's gonna win the ground exchanges. I think Knight can really fluster Amirkhani. I mean, look what happened when Chaz Scally was looking for takedowns against Knight. Knight really made him regret going to the canvas multiple times. So I think that Jason Knight has the skills to kind of neutralize Amirkhani's strengths. And even though Knight has not been performing well, especially those last two fights against Lamas and Benitez, I think that he can bounce back here in a stylistically favorable matchup against Amirkhani. So my pick is going to be Jason Knight. Now, sticking with the featherweight division, we have Arnold Allen, who is 12-1, taking on Mads Burnell, who is 9-2. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Another quality fight. We were just talking about Arnold Allen a little bit ago, and he opened up minus 245, the comeback on Burnell at plus 175. And I think this is going to be a heck of a fight. I mean, Burnell is, in my opinion, a bit underrated in his own right. I mean, he put on a heck of a performance in his last fight, surprisingly to me, because it was a tough fight against, I think, a very game Mike Santiago, a very underrated fighter, Mike Santiago, because Santiago has a well-rounded game. He's got some striking ability. He's faced good, solid competition. He's got some wrestling ability as well. So to me, I was expecting Santiago to perform a lot better, but I underestimated Burnell's grinding ability. I mean, he's definitely a heck of a grinder. I mean, he comes into fights, he's got a little bit of power in the feet, so he's not out of his realm. It's not like he's a terrible striker in the feet, but make no mistake, his striking is basically utilized to set up his ground game. And once he gets you on the ground, I mean, he has the ability to pass, get in good positions, drop some ground and pound, look for submissions along the way as well. So he has an exceptional ground game. That's why I kind of didn't think it was at the level it is. But I mean, again, in his last fight, he proved to me that, especially at 145 pounds, he can grapple and grind with the best of them. So Burnell is going to come in with that same blueprint in place. He's going to look to take Allen down and kind of grind him out along the way. I think Allen is the better fighter, so it's going to be difficult for Burnell here. I think Allen is very well-rounded in his own right. We were just talking about him getting through Amirkhani, and Amirkhani was going after those takedowns. Had some success along the way there as well. So Burnell can look to that as far as the blueprint goes on how to possibly have a little success against Allen. But Allen really, he doesn't stay on the ground long. He looks to get back up, scramble back up to his feet, reverse position as well, and then he has a big edge, I think, on the feet over Burnell. I think he's going to be able to just kind of pick Burnell apart on the feet a little bit, do a little bit more damage along the way. I wouldn't be surprised if Allen gets some takedown in his own rights. I think that's the problem with Burnell. Offensively, his wrestling is really not that bad. He's just relentless enough that he's able to get the takedowns more often than not. But the problem is defensively, he's able to get scooped up and put on his back. And we've seen it that time and time again as well. Now, I think Allen is going to be able to do some of that as well. So this fight will probably play out in all areas. I could see both guys being put on their back, from top position as well, on the feet, of course, up against the cage. And I think Allen's going to probably have the advantage in most areas. So the only way I really see Burnell winning this fight is if he's able to shut Allen down, make it a boring fight, and kind of grind him out for 3 rounds. But Allen's not going to let that happen. I think he's good enough that he can implement his game plan and his path to victory here against a guy like Burnell and just kind of fend him off enough and do what he does best and outpoint him and maybe even possibly finish him along the way. But I think more so than not, it probably hits the scorecards and we see Allen getting another impressive, solid decision win. So the pick is Allen. I'm really liking what I see from this prospect. He's only 24 years old. He's such a well-rounded fighter. He's only going to continue to improve. So I'm on the Allen train. I think he's a heck of a fighter. But again, I take my hat off to Burnell. He's definitely better than I thought he was, but I just think this fight's going to be a little bit too much for him. So the pick is Allen to get the W here.
And I agree. I mean, Mads Burnell's the type of fighter that needs to get takedowns in top position to win. He really doesn't offer that much on the feet, so I expect Allen to definitely get the edge there. And Allen has a very good ground game. So if Burnell does get this to the floor, I can see Allen threatening with submissions and flustering him on the canvas. Not quite at a Jason Knight level, but Allen does definitely know what he's doing on the canvas. I mean, he picked up a last-second submission in his UFC debut, so he is a talented ground fighter as well, but I think that he can really have an edge if he keeps this upright and just outworks Burnell on the feet. Burnell will be looking for takedowns, but I think Allen is good enough to thwart some of those takedowns and again fluster Burnell on the canvas if he does get taken down with his active ground game. So I think Burnell is a little bit more one-dimensional, and while I thought that Burnell had a decent matchup in his last fight, if he was able to take Santiago down and keep him down, I just don't see him being able to keep Allen down. So my pick's going to be Arnold Allen here. I think that he can win a pretty one-sided decision as long as he avoids being stuck on his back repeatedly. Now moving on to the co-main event of the evening in the welterweight division, we have Neil Magny, who is 20-7, taking on Craig White, who is 14-7. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Magny opened up minus 380. The comeback on White plus 260. Right now looking over at BetDSI. Line is shot up. Right now it's minus 600. For Magny. The comeback on White is plus 430. I'll tell you what, White deserves a lot more respect than the current line indicates. But with that said, I can kind of understand it because stylistically this is a very difficult fight for White as well. But Magny has to be careful because White does bring some quality tools to the table here, especially his aggression. His power on the feet is a little bit underrated. His ability on the ground, his submission game on the ground is not bad either. He's a finisher. If you look at this guy, I mean, even from his back, White is able to throw up triangles, arm bars, and he's sneaky enough and slick enough that he gets the job done. Even if you think it's coming, you still can't stop it or have difficulty stopping it. That's how slick White can be. He's a finisher. I mean, all of his fights, I think, but one, or I think all of them have been, not making it to the third round. So all of his fights usually end in round one, but a few have trickled in the second round. So it doesn't take long in White's fights at all. I mean, he's that type of finisher. It's either finish or be finished with White. And unfortunately for him, Magny's just a better, more stable, more well put together fighter. I mean, Magny has a length over him. I think Magny has a striking ability overall on the feet. He's just more technical. He's more experienced against higher level competition. Magny is, of course, on the ground. I think Magny does have the wrestling edge overall. He's got good grappling ability as well. Now, if there's been, some kryptonite to Magny's game, I mean, he has been caught in submission 4 times, and it's been his chin that's let him down time and time again. So again, there is a path to victory for White, and he's sitting at plus 430 right now. So I wouldn't be shocked if this is an upset here, but logic says it shouldn't happen. And if Magny does not get caught, he should rule the scorecards or possibly finish as it gets in round 2, round 3, obviously. And that's probably the case here. So I think White's going to be a front runner. He's going to be dangerous early. Magny probably weathers that storm and ends up having a highlight reel type of finish in his own right. So that's why you're seeing him as a solid favorite. He should be a solid favorite, but this is the case again. Don't lay the chalk. Don't throw him in a parlay at this number. There's no value. I mean, it's just Magny should probably get the win, but White's dangerous enough to just keep people off at bay. So just make sure you're smart about this fight and avoid it at this point, because I do think it's a dog or pass situation, and the dog probably doesn't bite here. Now, if anything, if you think White gets a finish, just look for the props inside the distance for White, KO for White, or sub prop. That's how you bet this fight. Or inside the distance for Magny if the price is reasonable as well out there. So outside of that, don't bet this fight straight. Just stay away from it and see how it plays out again. But again, I do believe that White has some potential, and I think he would win some fights at 170 pounds if matched right. It just, unfortunately for him, it's just stylistically a bad matchup, and Magny should roll here in this fight. So the pick is Magny to win.
And I agree, but you do have to mention that Magny is vulnerable. I mean, he doesn't have a very good chin, so White has a bit of pop. So if he cracks Magny, then he can definitely win this fight. I mean, that's been Magny's MO is, he is a talented fighter with all the physical gifts, with just a ridiculous reach for the welterweight division, but he's vulnerable. If his chin gets hit in the right spot, he's going night-night, and he has had troubles against good technical strikers, but that's really not White. I mean, White is more of a jack of all trades, bit more submission focused, but White also can be beaten on the ground. I mean, he's been submitted multiple times in his career, so I think if Magny really wants to, he can win this fight anyway. Magny has this ability to just wear people down and kind of just roll over them as they start to slow down, because he pushes a really high pace. He has that jab that's just constantly flicking in your face, and then he can get takedowns and beat you up on the canvas. And when you can't keep up with him anymore, he usually ends up getting a TKO or some sort of finish. So Magny is a guy that with a lot of gifts, and as long as he can protect the chin, he's usually in good shape, or as long as he avoids facing an elite submission fighter, he's in good shape. So against Craig White, as long as Magny protects the chin, as long as White doesn't really hurt him, then I think Magny should roll in this fight. He could win a decision with the jab, just picking White apart. He could just wear White down because White's taken the fight on short notice and get a TKO as White slows down. He could get this fight to the floor and get a TKO on the ground, or maybe even a submission on the ground. There's a lot of ways for Magny to win, but I mean, the only way for White to win, I think, is at early in the first round if he hurts Magny. So as long as Magny avoids that, I think he dominates, and that's why he's such a significant favorite. So my pick is definitely going to be Neil Magny. Now this takes us to the main event of the evening in the welterweight division. We have Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, who is 14-2-1, taking on Darren Till, who is 16-0-1. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Thompson opens minus 165. Till opens at plus 125. So Till the underdog, Thompson the favorite. Right now we're seeing it exactly a pick on minus 110 either way across the board at a lot of spots. Right now over at DSI, to be exact, it's minus 126 for Till. At DSI, minus 104 for Thompson. So line margins have tightened up. Some spots the line did flip. Now it's starting to flip back towards Thompson. So a lot of action coming in Till's way. Now, of course, he's the homeboy. He's, the hometown guy. Obviously in the UK, he's the up and coming fighter. He's the guy that, I think is getting the push from the UFC. That's why he got matched up with a former title contender, that realistically, with the current champion, had some classic battles in both of those fights. He had, that draw, obviously, and then a close loss to Woodley, Thompson did. And outside of that, Thompson has been arguably the best striker the UFC's ever seen. I mean, his technical skill set on the feet is like no other. I mean, he's got that, karate, kickboxing type of style, and his precision, his movement, his accuracy, his power to go along with it, everything. I mean, it's a thing of beauty watching Thompson strike on the feet. I mean, just look at what he did in his last fight against a really good striker in Masvidal. I mean, I thought Masvidal would actually have more success against Thompson, and Thompson just easily won that fight, picked him apart, and cruised to decision win over a game fighter like Masvidal. So Thompson is elite as far as striking goes, and he's facing another guy that's known for his striking and Till. So it should be a no-brainer here, right? Thompson is the more technical fighter. He should roll here. I mean, how does Till realistically beat him? Well, I think Till's actually catching him at a good time. Again, this is a striker versus striker matchup. I do think Till is a little bit more well-rounded in his game because he's got wrestling. He's got the ability to get you down and throw some ground and pound. He has a little bit of sub ability as well. So I do think Till is a more well-rounded fighter where Thompson does have the edge on the feet, but Till is more known for his striking aspect. Again, if you look at his last fight that he had, I mean, it was nothing but impressive over Cerrone. He knocked him out. He got him out of there quick, like in the first round. So that's the kind of power that Till has over, some would say a declining Cerrone. I get it. And this fight is going to be definitely a little bit different, a lot tougher. I mean, this is a big uphill battle for Till in most people's minds. And I agree in some ways, but I think Till's ready. I mean, Thompson's coming off of an injury. He hurt his hand. I believe he got surgery since then as well. So I'm not sure where his mindset is here. And he knows what he's up against in Till. He knows that he has a formidable opponent. He knows that he's got a dangerous opponent in Till, that has enough knockout power that he can present some problems. I mean, if any kryptonite in Thompson's game at all, early on it was a little bit of conditioning issues, I thought, right? But he's addressed that. His conditioning and his cardio has improved a lot since his debut. So Thompson has addressed that. But even though he has good defense and he's elusive on the feet, he still is a bit chinny. He's been dropped. He's been knocked down. And I think that's actually what cost him the fight against Woodley. And he's been knocked down by other fighters as well. He's been hurt. Now his recovery is pretty good. You got to give him credit for that as well. But against a fighter like Till, I mean, with his relentless style, and if Till hurts Thompson, I think Till has that nastiness in him that he gets a job done and he finishes him. Thompson's not going to be able to survive it. So how I think this plays out is honestly Till with his confidence right now, being in his backyard, he's going to be ultra motivated. Thompson coming off of, like I said, a little bit of an injury and some surgery behind that as well. I'm not sure where he is mentally, physically at this point. I think Till is catching him at the right time. And although Thompson is a better striker and probably will be winning the striking battle, all it takes is one big punch to get through from Till to change the fight completely. And I think that's probably going to happen. So the better striker doesn't always win. It's the more effective striker, the more capable striker that night that gets it done. And I think Till is going to prove that. His knockout power is something special, I think, in the 170-pound division, the welterweight division, obviously. And I think, again, his confidence is just kind of coming into play. He knows that he belongs with the upper echelon of fighters. And even though this is a big step up in competition against Thompson, again, I think timing is everything, and Till is catching him at the right time. So I think that Thompson is going to probably end up getting finished by Till here. I think Till ends up breaking through. Again, even if it's not looking too great for him, I think he ends up landing that punch that drops Thompson, follows up with some ground and pound and puts him out of there, is how I think it probably plays out. So I am going to pick Till to win. I think the early action for the hometown guy was probably accurate, and that could be surprising and a head scratcher to most, but I don't know. I don't trust Thompson in this spot right now. And again, I've been a huge fan of Thompson because I like to see him having success in the UFC and as far as he's gotten because of his striking background. I mean, it's a unique situation. You don't really see people get to the level he has. I don't want to say being a one-trick pony, but, being a specialist in one particular style like Thompson is. So credit to him. He's worked hard to get where he's at, and he's definitely one of the best ever at 170 pounds, in my opinion. But I think he's going to match up here with a young gun that's probably going to be a little bit too much for him right now at this time, and I think Till gets him out of there. So my pick is Till to pull off what is now a pick'em type of fight, pull off the pick'em win, but in most people's minds would be an upset. So the pick is Till.
And I'm going to disagree. I think Darren Till is a talented fighter, and that victory over Donald Cerrone was impressive, but you got to remember he was getting Cerrone at the right time. I mean, Cerrone was on a bit of a losing stretch. Had not been performing particularly well in the welterweight division, and Till had a big size advantage. I just think you look at his track record, and Darren Till has not fought anybody even close to the caliber of Stephen Thompson. Now, Thompson, maybe Till's catching him at the right time too, as Nick mentioned, but I don't think so. Stephen Thompson is still an extremely gifted striker with excellent technical skills and use of distance. He can just fluster very talented fighters. I mean, you look, he flustered Jorge Masvidal. He flustered Rory McDonald. This is the type of fighter that can just make Darren Till miserable, because while Till is a powerful striker and a talented striker, he's not as technically sound and gifted as Stephen Thompson, or as well-rounded. I think Thompson can keep Till at bay with a really sharp, crisp jab. I think his kicking game is going to frustrate Till. Realistically, the best path to victory for Till is to step inside and just land that one big shot and hurt Thompson, which can happen. I mean, Thompson's been hurt by worse strikers than him. Jake Ellenberger clocked him. Thompson eventually got a ridiculous highlight reel victory in that fight, but it does happen. Thompson has eaten some big shots and he has been hurt. I don't really think the ground game will be much of a factor here, so I expect a 5-round stand-up contest, and I think Stephen Thompson is going to give Darren Till a bit of a reality check here. Till is aggressive, he's powerful, but Stephen Thompson is just so technical that I think Till will be hitting error repeatedly. I think he's going to get bloodied up from a really good jab by Thompson, and I think Thompson is going to land some kicks out of nowhere that are going to catch Till off guard. I mean, Thompson sets things up really well. So I don't know if this fight will get finished unless Till lands like something crazy and hurts Thompson, and then he just follows up and with a big swarming attack for a TKO. But I think Stephen Thompson proves why he's the number 1 ranked welterweight and Till's still just the number 8 ranked welterweight here. And this is just a monster step up in competition for Till, and I just don't know if he's ready for that. So my pick is going to be Stephen Thompson. So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC Fight Night 130. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB Premium on Twitter because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email alert if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsBreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Special thanks to BetDSI. Good luck everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.